When author Bethany Mandel started this interview, she did not know that this video was going to go viral for this shocking response.
So, woke is sort of the idea that
In this video, I'm going to give you 6 tips that you can use to save yourself from embarrassment anytime your brain freezes up or you don't know the answer to a question in an important conversation. Let's go. What's going on, everyone? Welcome to the Behavioral Arts. My name is Spidey and I use my degree in sociology and psychology, my certifications in criminal interrogation and body language analysis, and over 10 years experience as an award-winning mentalist to teach people behavioral analysis and practical psychology on stages and television shows all over the world. This week, we're looking at an interview that author Bethany Mandel did on a show called Rising. And she was asked a question that, given the subject of her book, she should have easily been able to answer. However, whether it's because she didn't know the answer or because her brain just gave up on her in that moment, she gave one of the most awkward responses ever. As she predicted in her actual response, the clip went viral, getting millions of views and millions of comments from all kinds of people with all kinds of opinions. Now, for someone like me who studies and teaches human behavior and puts a lot of focus on verbal and nonverbal signs of stress, this was a goldmine because we saw so many indicators of stress that we've talked about on the channel. Now, in this video, we're gonna quickly talk about those signs of stress because although a lot of them are very obvious, some of them are a little more subtle, but more importantly, this is such a great lesson on the shift we see in behavior when someone suddenly gets stressed in a conversation, regardless of why they got stressed. But more importantly in this video, I'm gonna give you 6 tips that you can use if ever you're in a situation like this to where you don't know the answer to a question or your brain completely gives up on you to save yourself from embarrassment. Whether it's in a sales situation, in an interview, or any important conversation that you might have. Okay, first let's start by looking at the interview and looking for some signs of stress. And we'll make this super interactive. So here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna play her answer to a different question, just so you guys can get a bit of a baseline, to get a feel as to how she speaks, how she communicates, both verbally and non-verbally. Then I'm gonna play the viral moment, the question where she froze up. And whether you have a pen and paper or your phone is open or even just in your head, make note of verbal and nonverbal signs of stress that you're seeing, that you're noticing.
So help us understand, what do you see as what's going on with the left or progressives' attack on youth today?
Yeah, absolutely. So the crux of the argument of the book is that there is sort of a woke reimagining of our society, and it's happening in a lot of different ways in a lot of different areas of our lives. And there's been a lot of attention, justifiably, on corporations, in media, but there hasn't been a lot of focus, if any, on sort of the youngest generation. And so Carol and I wanted to talk a lot about how this sort of interferes with childhood as it's happening in America right now. There's a lot of chatter about what's happening on college campuses, but not enough about children.
Would you mind defining woke? Because it's come up a couple times, and I just want to make sure we're on the same page.
So, woke is sort of the idea that this is going to be one of those moments that goes viral. Woke is something that's very hard to define, and we've spent an entire chapter defining it. It is sort of the understanding that we need to totally reimagine and redo society in order to create hierarchies of oppression. It's hard to explain in a 15-second soundbite.
Yeah, look, it's
one of those things that...
Okay, first and foremost, it's pretty easy to jump on someone in a really bad moment like this, right? Because she's being asked a question that, given her subject, given her book, she should be able to answer, and she's absolutely falling apart. So it's easy to jump on that and go, oh my God, how embarrassing. How could she not know the answer to this? She wrote a book on it. She must really not be that smart. Whereas that's the reflex that I typically try to steer away from. Bottom line is, let's not just assume that the reason she froze up is that she doesn't know her subject and that she's unintelligent. That's not necessarily the case. There could be other reasons, and maybe there are some clues in her behaviors. So let's dive in to look at some of the behaviors here that are indicating stress and why they're happening. So first off, I know quite a lot of you noticed this. In fact, it was in a lot of the comments as well, but her blink rate is quite increased. She's blinking very often. Now, the average human blink rate is somewhere between 14 to 21 blinks per minute. For some people it's higher, for some people it's lower, but that's a more or less average range. But here's the thing with her. It's very much part of her baseline for her blink rate to be that high. And not only is it a very high blink rate, she also very often has flutters. And flutters are when the eyes go da-da-da-da in quick succession, like really fast. Now, when this happens to someone that doesn't have a high blink rate or doesn't flutter often, it's something you want to take note of, because when we're stressed, our eyes dry out and our blinking increases. Also, fluttering is something we see with someone who's dealing with a lot of thought or a lot of emotion. When we process things, we flutter a lot. So if this randomly starts to happen, we could take note of something like that. But in this case, it didn't randomly start with this question. It was there in the baseline question. It was there in the entire interview. Next up, we have verbal leaks. And verbal leaks are any audible sign of hesitation. So anything like that when someone's talking and you could hear the hesitation. Now, this is a weird one for her because there were certain answers earlier in the interview where she got right into it, no hesitation, and very concisely answered the question. But when this topic was brought up a little bit earlier than this moment, we did start to see some hesitation in the beginning of her answer. So you can look at this and say, okay, she's nervous around this topic, which is why we were starting to see those verbal leaks even before this question. Or you could say, sometimes she answers questions, straight away, jumps right into it. Maybe it's a little more prepared in her head. And sometimes it just takes her a bit more to catch her stride. Next, we have something that goes by a lot of different names depending on who you ask. So some analysts just pair this with hesitation. Some analysts pair this with short non-answer statements. I just call it fluff. These are useless words that just delay getting to an answer. So if you listen to her in the beginning, she says, sort of the idea that.
Woke is sort of the idea that.
These are all things that's kind of trying to give us a second to get to that answer. Now, the same thing that I said to verbal leaks applies to this as well. It's not the first time it's happening in this interview, but it's not a regular thing for her. So once again, I think it's an indication that around this topic, there are some questions coming up that she was less prepared for, because we're seeing a sudden shift to where we're seeing that, sort of like where she needs a second to formulate her thought. Earlier, she got to a thought. In this one, it was a massive struggle. Next up, we have speech disfluency. This is where your words actually start to fall apart and get jumbled up. So after the fluff, after the verbal leaks, when she started actually defining it, she said something like, need to totally redo. So she's actually having a hard time putting her words together.
We need to totally reimagine and redo society in order to.
Now this isn't baseline. So even earlier when she had those verbal leaks, where she had that bit of a fluff to get to an answer, once she got to the answer, in most cases, she had very smooth answers. Here, it's falling apart. This is a sign of stress, and it's also a sign that the brain just isn't working. You're trying to talk, but there's too much going on, so that speech is falling apart. We call this increased cognitive load, and it's something we pay a lot of attention to in interrogations and interviews, because if someone who speaks very coherently, all of a sudden their speech is falling apart, it means that a part of their brain might be distracted with something else. It's now focusing on something else, which is why they're having a hard time getting those words out, because they're not focused on what they're saying. So it's a red flag. And when it happens with other signs of stress, we start getting curious as to why this is happening all of a sudden. Another thing we're seeing quite often in this answer that we didn't see before is these lip compressions. And it's not like these really tight lip compressions, but these little bursts where we see some tightness around the mouth. And it's happening between words or between sentences. And there's a really big obvious one before she says that, this is one of those things that's going to go viral, where we see a big compression and the mouth is raised like this.
This is going to be one of those moments that goes viral.
Now, that almost looks like a mouth shrug. The reason it looks a little different is because mouth shrugs, which usually indicate not knowing something or not caring or having nothing to add, usually a mouth shrug, there's some puffiness in the top lip and even in the cheeks. It looks like this, right? So a lot of things puff up. Here, it's compressed, it's raised, but I'm not necessarily seeing any of that puffiness, and nothing else is shrugging. The shoulders aren't going up, the hands aren't going up. It doesn't look like a shrug, just this raised compression. Now, lip compression is consistent with disagreement or withheld opinion. So if somebody's talking about something and there's something you're thinking, but you don't really want to say it, you might just have this compression. We even see it in children, like when you ask them to say something that they don't want to say or that they're not supposed to say, you might see them go like this, right? You see that compression in the lips. We're trying to hold something in. In her case, I think it happens the most when she realizes this isn't going well. And I think she's kind of holding in some sort of, shit, like this is not going well. Because she says it, right? She immediately goes on to say, this is one of those things that's gonna go viral. So I think the more she's trying to formulate a thought, the more her thoughts are failing her. And I think this lip compression is like a frustration. Like she just wants to be like, this is not the time for this. Maybe she wants to swear like it's not going well. And I think that lip compression is holding in maybe a swear word or some frustration, something along those lines. Another verbal tell that we often see with people who are struggling or who are feeling a little self-conscious is when she says, we spent a whole chapter in the book defining it. And this is called a resume statement. A resume statement is anything we say, a statement we make to build our character or to raise the image that people have of us. So anything that seems like it's bragging or building ourselves up falls under the category of a resume or convincing statement. They both mean the same thing. So resume statements is another thing where you want to pay attention to if it suddenly starts happening. So let's say you're talking to someone and they don't really have this bragging thing or building themselves up. All of a sudden you start talking about their relationship and they start saying things like, oh, I'm very honest in relationships. I never cheat. I would never do something like that. All of a sudden they're building themselves up. It's a red flag. You got to wonder why all of a sudden they feel the need to build themselves up. So in this case, it's quite simple. She's falling apart. She knows that it looks like she's not informed. It looks like she doesn't know her subject. So she throws in that resume statement to say, well, there's actually a whole chapter in the book where we define it very well. We do a really good job in the book, but I can't do it right now. I did it in the book, but I can't do it right now. So put a pin in that. When we get to the tips later, we're going to talk about why a resume statement is a reflex that we have, but it might work against us. Next, we see a gesture that I think a lot of you would have caught. And it's interesting because I think that different commenters will call it something different because it can have numerous interpretations. So the gesture is when her hand comes up and moves her hair out of the way. Again, this is not something she's doing throughout the interview. A lot of people get nervous in interviews, so they fidget with their hair, they play around with their clothes and all this kind of stuff. She's not doing that. But here we see the hand come up and fix the hair. So there's a couple of ways to look at this. You could look at this as a grooming gesture, and grooming gestures is anything that we do to fix our appearance, and this is something we do when we're self-conscious. When stress spikes, we start to see more grooming. You can also see this as what we call a pacifier, adapter, or self-soothing gesture. In fact, a lot of analysts say that grooming is a self-soothing gesture, right? Because it makes us feel better about ourselves when we groom, so it kind of falls into that category. But anything that has a rubbing or massage-like motion to it falls under the category of pacifier, adapter, or self-soothing. And this is something we've seen in a lot of the research. When stress spikes, these gestures spike as well. So that hand going through the hair like this could be grooming. It could also be a self-soothing gesture. Finally, some of you may have classified that gesture under the ventilating category. So ventilating is, once again, when we're stressed, the body temperature might rise, and we often see gestures that allow us to bring more air to the body. And often, when we look at people with long hair, they might move their hair out of the way because it allows more air to come to the neck, because the hair might be blocking that and might be contributing to feeling that warmth. So that's the thing with body language. Often we could see a gesture, and in and of itself, if all she did in an answer was move her hair out of the way, it could be a billion things. It could be grooming, it could be just there was an itch, or her hair was bothering her. It could be a million things. But within a cluster, it's more likely to be something along the lines of ventilating or being self-aware. Another gesture we're seeing is these little bursts of like these no's, and we're even seeing her hand come up and gesture like this. I think these are both her being aware of being stuck and just trying to get unstuck. Like it's just this doesn't always mean negative experience. A lot of people emphasize by doing this with the head, but these little kind of like more jolty no's like this, like it's very in tune with frustration, just trying to move past this. These gestures are very much in tune with that. I wouldn't say that they're necessarily associated to stress. I think they're more associated to her being stuck. The last one I want to cover is at the end when she says, it's hard to explain in a 15-second soundbite. And this is something that we, again, often see in interrogations or in interviews when someone is handling a question poorly, and as they're about to give up, sometimes you might see them attack the question or criticize the question. Like in this case, she's going, it's really hard to explain in a 15-second soundbite. But here's the thing, nobody asked you to explain in a 15-second soundbite. I don't know where that element is coming from. She was just asked, what's the definition? That's it. Nobody said 15-second soundbite, but instead of just admitting that she's having a moment, please give me a sec, or whatever, some of the tips that we're gonna go look at, she'd rather just say, well, I can't do this in a 15-second soundbite. What you're asking of me is unreasonable. But nobody asked that. So very often we see the person turn on the question or the person asking the question as a way to kind of save face. Like this isn't me who can't define this, it's just I can't do it in the way that you've asked, except for nobody asked you to do it that way. So look, we could keep going. There are a few more. I'd love to see what you guys saw in the comments that we didn't cover, if you have anything to add to the ones that we just listed. But the bottom line is we certainly have a massive cluster of stress here. So what does this mean? By the way, on the channel, we often talk about clusters of deception. Now I keep saying a cluster of stress. What's the difference between the two? Well, there isn't much of a difference between the two. When I'm doing an interview or an interrogation and I see these clusters, that allows me to know that I need to spend a little bit more time around this topic. There's something here. It could be uncertainty. It could be deception, like they're hiding something. It could be that they're flat out lying about something. Something is causing the person to have an increased cognitive load and increased stress. It could be nothing. It could be that in that moment, they remembered that they may have left their oven on at home. So all this stress is happening, all this cognitive load stuff is happening. It's never certainty, but it's just a sign that something is going on. So what is happening specifically with her? I think that the reason she froze up in this moment is because of the statement she made in the previous question. So in the previous question, she said that there are a lot of topics that are a right versus left conversation. She doesn't think that this is one of them. She said that she hopes that parents from both sides will pick up this book because there are problems with the concept of woke that has nothing to do with the left. She tried to separate the two.
There's a lot of things that are sort of a right versus left conversation, but this is not one of them. And I agree with you. I think that there are a lot of people for whom this argument resonates, and it's not just right-left issue. We hope that, parents of all political stripes will pick up the book.
So now when she was asked to define woke, I think she became aware of the fact that she just said that this isn't a left versus right thing. So the definition that she has to give to the word woke has to appeal to both. It can't sound like an attack. It can't sound like a defense. It has to be in the middle because she just made that statement that this isn't a left versus right thing. So I think the struggle, and I think she even gave a clue in saying it's hard to define it really quickly because there's a lot of components to it, a lot of different interpretations. It's taken on different meanings to different people, and it's a loaded question. So in that moment, I think her struggle was to provide a definition that is objective and doesn't take a side, because she's here to promote her book and she doesn't want to upset anybody. And I think her struggle was to come up with that objective definition. Okay, so now that we've established that there's a cluster of stress here, now that we have an idea as to maybe why this is happening, let's talk about how you can avoid this happening to you. So whether you're in a conversation, in an interview, whether you are in a sales situation and something's asked and you freeze up or you don't know the answer, how do you handle that? I'm going to give you 6 tips that you can start thinking about to never have a situation like this happen to you. But before we do me a huge favor, hit that subscribe button, turn those notifications on for more behavioral analysis and practical psychology content. And for regular viewers who want to encourage the channel, I will leave a link in the description where you could find out more about the memberships and how you can join. All right, so here we go with the 6 tips that you can use to avoid embarrassment when you don't know the answer to a question or when you freeze up. And for the first one, I want to do a really quick magic trick for you, really simple one, just to demonstrate my point. So deck of cards, all the cards are different, and I will give them a mix, that way I can't know the location of any of the cards. And if you were here, I would have you reach out and grab one, but you're not, so I'll just randomly stop at one, and I'll close my eyes and I'll hold it up to the monitor like this. So hopefully you guys could see that card and remember it. Curtis, can I see that? Lovely. So I'll keep it like this in frame. and I'll leave it sticking out like this. And again, if you were here, I would have you push it in yourself, but you're not, so I'll put it in like that. And the card is lost in the deck. So like I said, this is gonna be super simple. I'm gonna give the cards a mix, a shuffle, and I'll simply try to just cut directly to your card. So I'll just give it a couple of cuts like this, and hopefully I've cut exactly to your card. So if this was a performance, I would say, what was your card? And you would tell me, and I would turn it over, and 10 of diamonds. There it is. So the point isn't the trick. The point is to what? No, it wasn't? Seriously? That's an awkward time to mess up a trick. What was it? 3 of... You know what? I'll just give a blow on the 10 of diamonds and turn it into your card, the 3 of spades. So there it is. That's the trick. Why did I perform that one? Let's talk about it. That was a simple card trick, but within it, it contained a very popular plot or premise that a lot of magicians and mentalists use. And it's called the magician in trouble. In fact, if you've seen a few magic or mentalism shows, it's likely that you've seen an effect that goes more or less that way. So the performer is attempting to do something and they mess it up. They can't find your card, they can't tell you the picture that you're thinking of or the word that you're thinking of, and it looks like they failed. But then something happens, an extra element, and they fix the problem, and once again the audience is amazed. But why is this so popular, and why does it work as well as it does? Because we see it work, we know it works with audiences, but why? It's quite simple. A magician in trouble is a really great way to remind an audience that even if I can do things that you can't explain, even if I do the impossible, I'm human and I mess up as well. We really connect with that moment where we're watching the performer and something goes wrong and we go, oh yeah, that's hilarious. That type of thing would happen to me. This is something, if I tried to do that trick, that would happen to me. So we relate, we connect with the performer human to human. And then when they fix it, we're rooting for the performer, so we're happy again. So it takes away from that, look how cool I am with all these things I could do vibe. Now, believe it or not, this actually has a name in psychology and it's called the pratfall effect. And it has been researched that when someone has an air of confidence, or we see someone who seems accomplished, intelligent, we like to see them fail a little bit, not miserably, but we like to see moments of clumsiness because it reminds us that they're a human and we connect with them human to human. And that brings me to my first tip. In moments where your brain is failing you, in moments where you can't answer a question, instead of leaning away from that vulnerability and trying to save face, lean into that vulnerability and be open about the human moment that you're having. Because everyone has had moments like that and they can associate with it. In fact, if you watch a performer actually mess up and they try to act like, oh no, nothing's happening, everything's going smoothly, it's a really bad look. It's so cringe. But when you lean into that mess up, whether it's by design or not, it's so much more effective. So again, quite simply, instead of trying to shy away from it, lean into the human experience you're having by saying, oh my God, this is such an awkward moment for me to draw a blank. I'm so sorry. If you could just give me a sec, I don't know what the heck's going on. And just work from there. You'll notice that in the interview, Bethany Mandel gave that resume statement. She said, we actually spent a whole chapter in the book defining it. And what that does is it makes us go, well, then why can't you define it now? Because she's trying so hard to make it seem like, oh no, I could definitely define this. There's no problem. In fact, I did it in the book. And there's a part of me just going, well, then define it. Go ahead and define it. So when you try to shy away from that and pretend like there isn't something going on, it kind of makes us think, okay, we're not stupid. We know something's going on. Just come clean with it. What's going on? Tell us what's going on. So yeah, fight that impulse to build character and be like, oh, I could totally do this. And kind of making yourself against the person asking the question and just kind of level with them human to human. The second tip goes hand in hand with the first tip. In fact, I would say it's an elaboration of the first tip, and it's walk them through what's going on. Walk them through what the delay is or what you're having a hard time with. See them as an ally. Work with them as opposed to against them. So whatever the case may be, remember, as a human, they've had a moment like that as well. So let's say mid-interview like this, your mind completely blanks out on you. So once again, you lean into that human emotion, but you walk them through it and you go, I'm gonna be honest, I think the reason I'm blocking is because any definition I have in my head is really convoluted, and this is probably my fault. I should have probably come up with a more condensed one. If you give me a second, work with me. So just walk them through what's happening. You can even use really powerful persuasion principles here by saying something like, I'm sure you've had moments like this. It's so embarrassing. Thanks for understanding. So in doing that, you're enacting what's called social proof when you say, I'm sure you've had moments like this, because we connect with people who are like us. So your audience is likely to remember, yeah, you know what, I've had moments like this as well, believe me. So we connect with that. And when you say thanks for your understanding, that is once again a psychological principle that's been really effectively tested and proven called labeling. And essentially what it means is, like, if you call someone generous, they tend to behave more generous. If you say thank you for your kindness, they tend to be more kind. So by saying thank you for your understanding, it kind of evokes that understanding side of them. So we can mush tips 1 and 2 into lean into the actual human experience as opposed to shying away from it, and explain to them, walk them through what's going on. Humanize the entire moment. The third tip is this: you don't have to tackle the entire question exactly as is. You can tackle a part of the question, you could tackle a version of the question. So for example, in this case, she was asked to define woke. And maybe she can't think of an example right there and then, but she's researched the topic, so maybe give us a definition. Maybe while researching the topic, you found an author, or you found the dictionary definition. Give that, work from there. So she could simply say, you know, actually it's funny, this reminds me when I was researching the book that someone said this about the definition of woke. Quote someone and work from there. Similarly, she could simply reference the book in saying, well, in the book we talk about this being the meaning, but I think that it's more this. So give yourself a bit of time by tackling a part of that answer, or going to a part where you do have certainty, even if it means redirecting a little bit and then circling back to answering the question. Now, there is a warning with this tip, and it's the fact that if you do this a lot, it'll seem like you just don't answer questions head on. You throw fluff, you redirect, and all this kind of stuff. So I wouldn't do it a lot, but in a key moment like this where you're stuck, to redirect it a little bit, or to just answer part of it, or answer something similar to give you enough time to circle back and actually answer the question, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. It'll just give you a couple of extra seconds to formulate a decent thought. The fourth tip seems pretty self-explanatory, but I think that Bethany could have definitely used this. And anytime you're going to do an interview like this, where someone's going to interview you and it's being filmed or it's being broadcast live, this is a really, really big one, maybe the most important one, and it's this: know your subject really well and know the interview really well. In most interviews that I've done on radio or television, I've asked for a list of questions that they're likely to ask me. Now, of course, they might deviate a little bit, but if I see the vibe, the general vibe of what type of things they want to know, it helps me kind of prepare a little bit better things that I may not have known, like, oh, okay, I didn't realize they want to talk about this part of my career. I better get ready for that. So really, really know your stuff. This applies to job interviews as well, or anytime you go to buy something or sell something. Know the product, know the company, do all your research. I'll tell you, it is so impressive as an interview consultant when a question is asked during an interview and the person can answer with actual history of the company. They've done their research. It really comforts you into knowing, okay, they're not just out looking for a job, they know this place. They did their research on this company and they want to have a place here. So doing your homework is never a bad thing. Be prepared. The fifth tip is not one that could have served Bethany at all, given the specific question that she was asked, but it's actually, I think, one of the more useful tips on this list, because in day-to-day situations, I find myself using it quite often. And this is for situations where you're having a conversation, you're in an interview, and you get distracted for a second by something, and you realize towards the end of the person's question that you weren't really listening, and you don't really know what they're asking you. And this is a really awkward situation to be in because, like, what do? Like, they're looking at you, they're finishing their question, and now you have to speak with, you don't really know what they asked. So the tip is this, and this works better for longer questions because it's unlikely that someone's gonna lose us with a shorter question. So if it's this long question and it's dragging out, they lose you for a sec, you come back and you have to answer, simply ask for clarification. Could you clarify what you want? Can you clarify what you mean? Usually you'll get enough at the end of the question to get a little bit of a sense, but you're missing some important stuff. So you go, can you just clarify? Now here's the thing with asking people to clarify. You might think that if you ask someone to clarify, you might come off as unintelligent, like you don't understand the question. But most of us in most conversations are more focused on how we're coming off than the person in front of us. So I consult for interviews at a very high level professionally. So believe me when I tell you that most of the time, I'm listening, I'm analyzing, of course, that's what I'm there for, but I'm also quite self-aware of how I'm coming off. So when you're asked to clarify something, our reflex is not, well, how stupid is this person for not understanding my question? Our reflex is to go, oh yeah, maybe I didn't ask that the best way possible. So we immediately think of ourselves. So when you ask someone to clarify, don't worry so much about you coming off as like not understanding the question, because their instinct will be to go, yeah, maybe there's a better way to phrase that. Again, this works better with longer questions, because if it's a short question, like they go, so do you have any kids? And you go, can you clarify that question? That's not really a great look. But again, if it's a short question, it's not likely that they lost you somewhere in there. The sixth and final tip is one that I learned very early on in my career by pure fluke, and I've used very successfully ever since, especially in interviews like the one Bethany was doing. And it's simply this: if you can't answer or educate, then create curiosity. Here's what I mean by that. I think Bethany lost sight of the reason she was there. She wasn't there for a debate. She wasn't there to educate the public on her views. She was there to promote a book. So years ago, we're talking at least 15 years ago, I was doing a radio interview with a local radio station to promote a show that I was doing in the theater that same night or that weekend, I can't remember. The host of the radio show asked me, is mentalism real? Can you actually read minds? Or is it trickery? Or is it psychology? What is it? How does it work? And now I can answer that question no problem. Now when I'm asked, I say it's 100% trickery and psychology mixed together, but it's not real. I can't really see your thoughts. I can't read your mind. But back then I had a hard time with that question, because I felt like by admitting that, it takes away from the coolness of what I do, but I also didn't want to lie about it. So I had a very hard time with that question. So what did I do? Here I am, I'm on the radio, and I'm being asked, what is it? And I don't really have an answer that I'm happy with. So what do I answer? I say, well, the listeners are just going to have to come to the show to find out for themselves. So that was an aha moment for me, because I took a negative and I spun it into a massive positive. Instead of being stuck or hesitating or trying to come up with some weird answer that I know wasn't going to sound good, I create this curiosity and say, come on over and find out for yourself. So how can this be applied? Well, in Bethany's case, when she was asked to define woke, she simply could have said, you know what? The book has some segments where I feel like we did a really good job, and I would do a disservice by trying to explain it right now. So I would encourage listeners to go check out the book and see if they agree with our definition within the book. So again, you're there to promote your book. So when you're stuck like that, just default to promoting your book and say, you know what? We covered that in the book, and I would love for your listeners to go find out for themselves. Now, yeah, that might come off a little dodgy. It might come off as a little self-serving, like you're promoting your book, but I think it's certainly better than falling apart the way that she did. Now, interviews is not the only place where you can use this. You can use this, let's say you're a salesperson and somebody comes in and you're showing them a product, like let's say you sell cars, and they ask you a question about the car and you have no idea what they're asking nor how to answer it. You can't very well say, well, I don't know anything about this product. So you could simply say, well, you know what? The best way to find out is to take a test drive. So it doesn't necessarily work in every situation. But again, if we go back to number 4, be prepared for any conversation, and you could almost have these canned curiosity sentences that you could throw in. So for me, I have that one great one that whenever I'm on an interview and there's a question where I'm not sure how to answer, or I'm not confident I'll be able to answer properly, I just go, well, the listeners are just going to have to come to the show and find out for themselves. And it usually gets a super positive response. The host will laugh, fair enough, see you there. So whatever it is you're doing, try to figure out 1 or 2 lines where you could take this unknown or this freezing moment and turn it into this fun curiosity. And then maybe you answer it anyways. But again, sometimes in these moments, just buying a few extra seconds will save your entire conversation. Okay, so there it was. We had a bit of analysis there, and then we had 6 tips on how to navigate a conversation when you're stuck or you don't know an answer. I think the most important takeaway is lean into the human element and work on what you can and work with them on the question. And if you want to take a little bit part of it and just kind of admit that you're having a hard time, bring them into that energy. Work on it together. A lot of the time we see conversations as confrontations, me against them. But in most cases, it's not. It's us trying to work something out together. I see conversations more as agreements than disagreements. And I think when you make that shift, you start to see how they could kind of help you in these moments a little bit more, rather than, oh my God, I better build myself back up because I'm losing this conversation right now. There shouldn't be a loser, just 2 people having an open discourse. Let me know what you thought in the comments. Let me know what other signs you saw of stress. There were a few we didn't cover. I look forward to reading your comments about those, and I will see you on the next one.